Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, class, whenever you're deciding to join me. And thank you for joining in our English Language Arts virtual instruction for the week of March 23rd, 2020. Hopefully, you've already watched my introductory video and my instructional video on how to navigate Teams and are confident in accessing, and using the online platforms moving forward. If you haven't watched those videos, I would stop this one and go watch those first because they'll be very helpful in navigating the Teams platform and getting to your assignments, etc. So make sure you do that first and then go through this with me. This video is going to solely focus on how to complete the activities and lesson using the online materials in PowerPoint. So I will not go into how to access anything. I will just be going through the lesson with you. So make sure you watch those other videos first. Today's lesson will cover the standard 1.2, determining central idea. The standard says determine a central idea of a text and analyze its development over the course of a text, including how it emerges and is shaped and refined by specific details. I know we've been working on this standard all year, but I wanted us to start with something relatively simple that you're familiar with, just to get you comfortable with virtual learning. Keep this standard in mind as we go through the text. Here's an overview of the week's lesson. Remember, the first thing you should do each week is respond to the attendance question in order to be counted as present. Go to the attendance channel and reply to the question, and I will mark you as present for the week. If you do not respond by Friday, you will be marked absent for the entire week. So please make sure you do that first and foremost. Task 2 is your weekly Achieve article. This week's is Medieval Europe, Understanding the Black Death. This article will appear on your homepage, so you don't have to search for it. However, the other 10 articles that you needed to complete for this quarter are also on your homepage, so you'll have to probably scroll through. Sorry, my cat is attacking me. This article, Medieval Europe Understanding the Black Death, will open Monday and it will close on Friday. There is no makeups, there's no extra time. It will open Monday, it will close Friday. So make sure you are doing this one first. You have until March 27th to finish the other Achieve articles if you haven't already, any of those past due ones. But I would make that second priority to this Achieve article. So do the Medieval Europe Understanding the Black Death article first before you make up any missing ones. Again, those 10 that you are already supposed to have done will be available until March 27th. So that's Friday. You have 1 week to get it done. Nothing really has changed with Achieve. You have to make a 75% or higher on the first try for it to count. If you don't get the 75% or higher, you need to attempt the stretch article activity. If you still don't make a 75% or higher, I will be averaging those two scores together to give you your points. So there won't be any makeup articles moving forward. You will just have to try your best to pass the article. I have a tip on how to pass that activity. Read the article. Read it before you do the activity. You'll be surprised how easy it is to answer those questions if you actually read the article. I just want you guys to do an experiment for me. I want you to actually read the article and then do the activity and see if you pass the first time. And if you do, maybe that is a idea moving forward to always read the article before trying the activity. Just an idea, just an experiment that I think will really benefit you. All right, moving on. We have our common lit article we'll be reading is called The Black Death by Margaret Gushue. So as you can see, both our Achieve article and our text we'll be reading for the assignment are based on the Black Death, which is the bubonic plague. I thought it was a fitting topic for the time since that was a pandemic in the 14th century and we're going through a pandemic now. It is actually really interesting how many similarities between the Black Death and the coronavirus. I know the Black Death was a completely different disease. It killed millions and millions of people, and this coronavirus isn't as serious, but it is really interesting to see all of the similarities. I really enjoyed reading the article. I actually learned something myself, and I hope you'll enjoy reading it too. So you'll have the before reading activity, the during, while you read activity, and the after reading activity. And then finally, you will complete an independent reading log on the days that you do not complete your Achieve article. So if you do your Achieve article on Monday, the rest of the week, you'll do an independent reading log. So this just overviews the attendance question and what it will look like and how to answer it. There's Miss Burns, my friend. She took the screen capture for the PowerPoint, so you get to see her too. And then this just outlines the Achieve article and how to get there if you need directions. Okay, so task 3 is this assignment 1A. It is the before you read activity. So I want to make sure, so you want to locate the week 1 assignment.ela Word document from the posted assignments within our virtual classroom on Teams. So if we go into Teams, we will find our assignment, and it looks like this. As you know, strong readers always activate their background knowledge and make personal connections to any text they read. So with that in mind, let's read the directions for the KWL chart. Before you read, fill out the K and W sections of the chart. And then after you read, fill out the L section of the chart. So in order to activate our background knowledge, we have a what I know about the Black Death. So this would be anything you already know about the bubonic plague. I'm sure you have read something about it before. And then this next one is what I want to know. What do you have questions about the bubonic plague that hopefully this this article will answer? If it doesn't answer it, you can always do your own research, right? And then what I learned about the Black Death. So after you read, there will surely be some information that you didn't know before. I read some things that I didn't know, and that is what you'll put in this column when you're done. So I'm going to give you a moment to fill in the K and W sections of your KWL chart, and then afterwards we will go into the while you read activity and reading the article. So if you'd like, you can go ahead and pause the video. All right, welcome back. Earlier I mentioned that the focus for this week is reading standard RI 1.2, which is for informational texts. These are nonfiction texts that inform you on a subject. Our reading standard for today focuses on being able to determine the author's central idea of the text and analyze how it develops over the course of the text. We want to focus on how this central idea emerges, so how it initially is brought up, and then how it is shaped throughout the text. Basically, our goal is to figure out what the author wants us to take away from this text, or the big idea of the text. So those are the two things you want to think about when trying to figure out central idea. What is the big idea? What does the author want us to take away? In previous classes, I explained it's the most important who and the most important what of the text. You can still use that, but this is a little more advanced. It definitely is shaped and refined throughout the text. We also want to analyze how it is shaped and refined, as I said before. So in our during the reading activity, we are going to pick out the most important sentence, most important phrase, which is not a whole sentence, and most important word of these respective paragraphs. And hopefully by analyzing different parts of the text, we're able to figure out the author's central idea as a whole. So I want you to follow along as I read the directions. As you read the Common Lit article, The Black Death by Margaret Gushue, pick the most important sentence, phrase, and word for paragraphs 2, 7, 9, and 11, and copy and paste below. Then, in your own words, state the author's central idea of the text as a whole. So just like I outlined, I think it would be a good idea for you to do what I'm doing and split your screen between the article and the graphic organizer, so that way you don't have to keep tabbing back and forth. You have both things right in front of you. I'll give you a moment to locate the text. Remember, you can access the text through DCPS's single sign-on feature under Blended Learning. Click on Common Lit, and you should see the assigned text. So we are going to read this now, and we're going to stop at paragraph 2 and go and fill in our graphic organizer. The Black Death by Margaret Gushue, 2018. The bubonic plague, commonly referred to as the Black Death, is a devastating disease that is believed to have killed around 50% of Europe's population in the 14th century. Wow, 50%. That's half. In this informational text, Margaret Gushue further discusses the ways in which the plague impacted Europe. As you read, take notes on how the plague changed life in Europe. So we won't be doing that. Instead, we will be doing this activity. And I'm pretty sure in your article, this, as you read, has been changed to tell you to do this assignment. All right. So it's going to start off with a quote. There was no one who wept for any death, for all awaited death. Ad nola ditura, Siena, 1348. Wow, that is a pretty heavy quote. So no one cried when their family died because they were just awaiting their own death. That is pretty hard-hitting. It was a fateful day in October 1347 when a fleet of ships docked in Sicily, a large island just off the southern coast of Italy. Their arrival would change the course of European history. They carried traders who had arrived from the port city of Kaffa in Crimea. The people who gathered on the docks to receive this ship had no idea at the time that just by being there, they were signing their own death warrant. So if you look, this is considered paragraph 2, and we will be picking out the most important sentence, most important phrase, and most important word. So if I think about the most important sentence in regards to the Black Death, I think I'm going to pick this last sentence because this tells us how easily the plague spread. So I'm just going to highlight it and then hit Control C, which will copy the text. And then in my graphic organizer, Control V, which will paste the text. That way I don't have to type a bunch. And I'm going to put my quotation marks. I think this is the most important sentence because it talks about how easily the plague spread and how deadly it was. So just by being at this port where there were infected people, they were going to die. There was no question about it. So I think that is very important when you think about the Black Death. Most important phrase, not a whole sentence. This phrase can also not be part of the sentence that I've already posted. So, or that I've already picked for my most important sentence. So I'm going to look outside of the last sentence. And if I look through here, their arrival would change the course of European history really jumps out at me because that seems very important, that this plague is going to change the course of history. So I'm just going to write, I'm not going to write the whole sentence. Actually, you don't have to type anything. You can just copy it. So I'm going to say, change the course of European history. That is not a whole sentence, it's just a phrase. Control C and Control V, ... Actually, you don't need the ... because it's a phrase. And then finally, we have most important word. I think the most important word is probably the hardest part because there are so many words. How do you know what the most important one is? If I look outside of the paragraph and I think about the title, The Black Death, what it says in this little introductory info about 50% of Europe's population dying. We have this quote about death. And then finally, it says they're signing their own death warrants. So to me, the most important word so far is death. We're seeing what this disease is doing to everyone. Everyone is dying. It is leading to death. So that, to me, that is the most important word. When you're thinking of the most important word, there's obvious words that it wouldn't be. Ships, docked, arrival. So these words are just not, obviously not the most important. So think about it that way. Think about the text as a whole, and then it might be easier to pick the most important word in the respective paragraph. Okay, moving forward. When the cabin opened, they were shocked to find the ship rampant. If we press on these numbers, it tells us the definition of this word, which means spreading unchecked. Okay, so when the cabin opened, they were shocked to find the ship rampant or spreading unchecked with disease. There were corpses with swellings on their body and black spots on their skin. The remaining survivors were gravely ill with high fevers. They spat blood. They had swollen lumps in their armpits and near their groins. No one had any idea what the disease was, why it had struck, or how to help them. Wow. So I know we're going through a pandemic right now, but at least nobody's spitting blood and having lumpy armpits and groins, right? So that would be really scary to be around. I feel like the coronavirus is more of like a hidden fear, like you don't know who has it and stuff. But this one, you would definitely know. They'd be spitting blood at you, being lumpy. So we're just gonna move on. But that's pretty crazy what the Black Plague did to people. In just 2 days, most of the survivors on board had died. But by then, they had spread the disease to everyone with whom they had come into contact in Sicily. So everyone that these people came into contact with got the disease. That is insanely contagious. It was an outbreak of bubonic plague that would later be known as the Black Death. The trade ship is the first recorded account in history of its arrival in Europe. It is difficult to know the exact death toll, but historians today estimate that between 1347 and 1351, this plague killed at least 100 million people across Europe and Asia. Could you imagine 100 million people dying from what's going on right now? Maybe this is why we're taking such precautions. The arrival and spread of the Black Plague. I love headings. This is particularly helpful for what we're doing right now, which is trying to understand how a central idea is shaped. So far, this whole article has been about the Black Death or the bubonic plague, which is what the article is titled. And then these headings show me how they are shaping and refining the idea of the Black Plague. So it's doing exactly what our standard is asking us to figure out for us. So this is going to talk about the arrival and spread. So that's developing that idea about the Black Plague. And then if we go down, symptoms and devastation and societal effects. So it has basically the before, during, and after of this plague. So that's how they develop the idea of the Black Plague. So if we're thinking about the most important who and the most important what, I think the who is definitely going to be the Black Plague, and you want to figure out what the author is telling you about the Black Plague. Okay, moving on. So we're on paragraph 5. The Black Death, known as the Great Plague or simply the plague, was caused by a strand of bacteria found in a population of fleas. These fleas lived on the backs of rats in Asia. Even before the Black Death arrived on European soil, there were rumors of a deadly disease that had taken down entire armies in China. So there's a similarity. Both diseases, the one back then and the one now, came from China. Earlier in the 14th century, trade between distant countries was prohibitively or so high of a cost that it prevents people from using or doing something. So it was so high of a cost that trade didn't happen much, right? So early in the 14th century, trade between distant countries was prohibitively time-consuming and expensive. But by the 1340s, demand for foreign goods had risen, and travel between the East and West was fairly common. So that's just like today. People travel from, Europe and America and China all the time. That's why we saw this spread of the disease. While this meant that trade improved, it also meant that disease could be more easily transferred across the two regions as well. The rats were carried along trade routes from the east. A diseased rat could pass the plague to a flea while the flea was feeding on it, and the flea could then infect another rat, animal, or person. So that's something we don't have to worry about. There aren't any, we mostly travel from China or somewhere by plane, and there probably aren't too many fleas or rats on planes, right? So that's a big difference, right? Fleas were common enough at the time that bites did not startle people. Wow, that's gross. And humans had not yet discovered bacteria, let alone theorized that it could be transported by insects. At the time, people believed that disease spread through poisonous vapors or miasma, which is unhealthy or unpleasant vapor or smell coming from the bodies of the dead. So they believe disease came from that nasty smell dead people give off. Scientists today believe that disease was both airborne, meaning it passed from person to person who were near one another, and was carried via contact, namely through rats and fleas. Common medicinal practices of the time period, like bloodletting, what is that? The surgical removal of a patient's blood to treat illness. Okay, would also have contributed to the spread of the disease. For example, high standards of hygiene were not practiced. Physicians didn't even wash their hands. So the physicians aren't washing their hands, the people definitely aren't washing their hands, and we're seeing right now how that spreads, right? You don't wash your hands, and then you touch your face, and then you get sick. So these people, of course, they died, right? All right. Did we pass paragraph 7? Oh, we did. Oh, that's the one we just read. Okay. So we just read paragraph 7. We want to find the most important sentence, most important phrase, not a whole sentence that isn't in the sentence, and the most important word, right? So remember, we are under the heading, the arrival and spread of Black Plague. So when you're picking your most important sentence, you of course know it needs to be about the who, the Black Plague, and then maybe it needs to be something about the arrival and spread. So think about what the most important sentence could be, what the most important phrase, and then finally the most important word from this paragraph based on what you have read. I'll give you a moment to pause the video and fill that out. Some questions you can ask yourself. Based on what you have read so far, what sentence jumps out as you as the most important? So read that paragraph again and think about which sentence just jumps out at you as the most important. And we know our topic is Black Death, so what is the paragraph adding to this topic? How is it shaping and refining this idea of Black Death? Okay, welcome back. So now we're on symptoms and devastation. So these paragraphs are going to be about the symptoms of the Black Plague and the devastation. The Black Death was an epidemic unlike any before it. Seemingly healthy people would be struck with the illness and die in as little as 3 days. Those who contracted the disease became very ill and suffered from high fevers. Tumors would grow on their armpits and in their groin area. This would be followed by vomiting blood as the lungs became infected. People were unable to sleep because of the pain and were often unable to keep food down. Wow, this disease seems very intense. It infected people with no clear pattern. The Black Death hit the poor and rich, the healthy and unhealthy. Whole households, including dogs, cats, and livestock, would all perish within a matter of months. It quickly became a pandemic, an outbreak of disease throughout an entire country or the world, which is what we're going through now. So I am understanding why it's called the Black Death, because it hit the healthy and unhealthy. It didn't matter if you were old or young, and it didn't kill just people. It killed your animals, your livestock, so your cows and pigs. Everybody died. So if the plague came through, it would just wipe out everything. It's very intense. In just a year, the Black Death had spread from the shores of Sicily northward to Italy, France, Spain, and England. In London, where living spaces were more cramped, making it easier for the plague to spread, there was an estimated rate of 6 deaths for every 10 people. Man, that means more people were dying than living. The disease also spread east, eventually affecting Germany, Scandinavia, and Russia. Before the Black Death, the population in Europe had been exploding. Europe lost roughly 20 million people to the disease during the initial outbreak. Historians estimate about 50 million people died from the Black Plague during the 14th century. It took about 200 years before the population got back to where it was before the Black Death. Wow, that is a lot of people. 50 million people died, and it took 200 years before the population got back to where it was before the Black Death. That is insane. So maybe that is making it more understandable for all of the precautions the state is taking, keeping us out of school, making us practice self or social distancing, and closing down the restaurants and stuff, because we look at the past at what has happened to people and we don't want that to happen again. So we take the necessary precautions. So I know you're probably not having much fun right now. You want things to go back to the way it was, but we're probably saving a lot of lives by making these sacrifices, right? All right, moving on. So this is our next paragraph, paragraph 9. And remember to look at the heading, Symptoms and Devastation. Think about what the most important sentence, phrase, and word is for paragraph 9. So that's this one right here that we just read. I'll give you a moment to fill that out. And when you can go ahead and pause the video. When you're ready, we'll move on. All right, societal effects. So we know now that we're shifting our focus from the devastation to how it affected society. The wide reach of the Black Death meant it affected all of European society. Before the plague, through the practice of serfdom, what is that? The state of being a serf, an agricultural laborer who was born to the land that they worked and could not leave in the hierarchical feudal system. Okay, so it's like a peasant. Servants were tied to the land that their lord owned and made almost no money. There weren't enough jobs, and many people struggled to find work. Shortly after the disease struck, the tides turned, and suddenly there weren't enough workers. Many countries now had more jobs to fill than people. This shift meant for the first time, people in Western Europe, particularly in England, had greater choice. They were able to move to different lands and in many cases find better working conditions because jobs were abundant and servants were scarce. Wow, so they started off not enough jobs. They had a hard time finding work. They were treated poorly. And then after the plague, there weren't enough workers to fill the jobs. So they are getting better working conditions. So that is pretty cool how that happened from this plague. The shift also affected the feudal lords, a high-ranking individual who had authority over others, as they had to offer better pay and free materials in order to attract workers. In 1349, King Edward III tried to freeze wages in England to pre-plague rates, but employers were so desperate for help they ignored his decree. The shift in power and wages also loosened the strict social order, giving a new measure of power to the workers and peasants. It effectively brought an end to serfdom in a number of European countries. That is crazy. So a whole shift in how society worked. It wasn't, all powerful lords and these peasants who suffered. It started getting more evened out. Not all societal change led to greater equality. The plague was indiscriminate, and its cause was unknown. This in turn led to the persecution of a number of minority groups. For example, Jewish communities were less affected by the Black Death than Christian communities. Scientists and historians today believe that this may have been due to the stricter rules around food preparation practiced in Judaism, which hindered the spread of germs. However, during the Middle Ages, the lower rate of infection in Jewish communities led to the superstition that Jewish people were the cause of the pandemic. This fueled rampant anti-Semitism, or hostility or prejudice against Jews. There were several massacres of Jewish people, and they were generally ostracized or excluded from larger European society. So that's another similarity we're seeing with the coronavirus. It came from China, so people are being prejudiced towards Asians. And we know that's not based in science, that's based in people's prejudice, and it's wrong. And come on, guys, it's 2020. This was the 14th century. Why are we still facing the same kind of prejudice? We need to wake up and, treat people as they should be treated, not based on fear, right? Okay. Religion. Was that paragraph 11?
What are you doing right now? What are you doing?
Sorry, guys, I'm back. We accidentally skipped over paragraph 11. So go back to this shift meant for the first time in Western society and find the most important sentence, phrase, and word. I was just learning so much about this that I kept reading on. So I'll give you a moment to pause the video, fill that out. Again, think about what this is adding about the Black Death. Look at the header and try to figure out the most important sentence, phrase, and word. Okay, welcome back. Let's finish reading our article. Where were we? Oh, religion, especially Catholicism, was central to the lives of many Europeans before the Black Death struck. While the disease spread, some believed it to be punishment from God. They decided to repent for their sins by wandering from village to village, publicly whipping themselves and others as penance or as to pay for their wrong deeds. That's crazy. Many lost faith in the Catholic Church as people continued to die from the plague. Some converted to Protestantism, which would be like Baptist, Methodist, things like that, while others became more interested in secular or non-religious ideas about the world. So there's another striking similarity. I've definitely seen some people post that this is a punishment from God, but, believe what you want. All right, last part, the Black Death's legacy. So this is all going to be about how it is viewed in history. Scientists believe that because of the climate in Europe, the Black Death never became endemic, or growing of existence in particular place, usually of a disease. So why it never persisted in the area. On the continent, they believe that the disease was eventually wiped out as rats and fleas died off, ironically from the very same plague. So it ended because the rats and fleas died from the plague and couldn't infect anyone else they were curing. The disease died out in Europe in 1351. While it continued to reemerge periodically over the centuries, it never had as far-reaching an effect as it did in the 14th century. The next outbreak of comparable size was in China and India in 1855, about 500 years after the Black Death reached the shores of Italy. 12 million people in China and India died. Wow, that's still a ton of people. Due to the timing of this final outbreak, scientists were able to isolate the bacterium and understand its spread. In October 1897, after developing a vaccine to slow the spread of cholera, scientist Waldemar Haffkine was sent to India. He created a vaccine against the bubonic plague in January 1898, using himself as the first test subject. Pretty cool. Scientists and historians today still study the Black Death. They continue to develop vaccines, but with our current knowledge of bacteria, it's no longer a threat it once was. Simple health measures and preventative care, such as washing hands and cleaning cuts, slows the spread of illness. Looking back, some scholars argue that the Black Death pushed Europe into modernity. The plague upended, or turned it upside down, traditional structures like religion and feudalism, that were once the cornerstones of medieval life. It redirected the path of European history, propelling it towards the modern age, though at the cost of millions of lives. So it changed how Europe worked. Maybe we'll see some societal changes after this is all over. I mean, we're doing virtual school now. Many businesses are closed. The stock market has crashed. So maybe after this all, we will be changing certain parts of our society that we found not to work. Or maybe it'll have some effect on something we don't know, like how it changed. There were more jobs because there were less people during this time. Maybe we'll have some kind of change like that. Anyways, so the last part of your graphic organizer is to figure out what the author's central idea for the text as a whole. So we know our who is the Black Plague, and you need to try to figure out what the author is trying to teach us about the Black Death. So what is the most important thing about the Black Death that could encompass the text as a whole? So you'll write that in your own words in this box here. I'll give you a moment to do that. You can go ahead and pause the video in order to fill in that central idea. Okay, welcome back. So now we've reached our after reading activity. Follow along as I read the directions. After you have read the common lit article, The Black Death by Margaret Gushew, fill in the L portion of your KWL chart and then answer the following short response questions in 3 to 5 complete sentences. Make sure to use proper spelling and grammar. So if you have incorrect spelling, it'll have this red line and you can right click and it'll tell you how to spell it right. This is how common lit is, so it's fine. And then if you see a blue line, that has to do with grammar. If you right click, it'll show you the correct grammar most of the time as well. And I want you to pay attention to these things so that you learn how to spell these words that you're misspelling, and you see where you may be using incorrect grammar, right? Okay, so you'll first fill in the L part, what I learned about Black Death. Anything that you found particularly interesting that you didn't know before from the text. Also, if they answered any of these what I want to know questions, you can put the answer in the what I learned. Okay, so your 2 questions. What connection does the author draw between the Black Death and the shift of power in Europe? Cite evidence from the text to support your answer. So you're going to talk about how the Black Death changed societal norms in Europe. And remember, those headings can probably help you find the evidence from the text very easily. Hint, hint. Number 2, what connections can you draw between the Black Death of the 14th century and the current COVID-19 pandemic? What are some key differences and similarities? I tried to point some out while we were reading. You also may have thought of some yourself, and you can always go back to the text to find more of those. I'll give you a moment to fill those out. You can go ahead and pause the video again and answer those questions. Okay, the final thing on this assignment is your weekly reading log. It says read a book of your choice and complete your weekly reading log below. At the tentative end of virtual learning, you will have a cumulative task, so make sure you're actually reading. If you don't have a lot of books at home, go to the library's website, use your student username and password, and you can do ebooks on the library's website. So I have, so you're only going to do 4 days. If you do your Achieve article on Monday, you would do your reading log Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. If you do your Achieve article on Tuesday, you would do your reading log Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So 4 days of the week, you are doing your reading log. 1 day of the week, you're doing an Achieve article. Put the title of the book, the author, and the number of minutes. I'm recommending 20 to 30 minutes. If you want to read longer, that's up to you. Remember, if you are working out of Teams, when you have completed the assignment, simply click Turn In. If you have downloaded it to Word, you will need to save the file as lastname.firstname.assignment1. Don't forget, this assignment will be due on Friday, March 27th, 2020. I hope this was helpful. If you need any help at all, please reach out to me. I'll have those office hours, that instructional time. And I'm really excited to go through this adventure in learning with you. I hope you all have a great day. See you later. See you next time.